Coming up on The World Today, Hong Kong pro-democracy lawmakers resign after Beijing moves to quash dissent. U.S. President-elect Joe Biden announces the teams he will use to ensure a smooth transition in January. Plus, several injured in a bomb attack at a Remembrance Day ceremony in the Saudi city of Jeddah. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers. All Hong Kong's pro-democracy lawmakers have resigned after Beijing forced the removal of 4 of their colleagues. On Wednesday, Beijing passed a resolution allowing the city's government to dismiss politicians deemed a threat to national security. Shortly afterwards, the opposition lawmakers said they would leave the city legislature in solidarity. The move means for the first time since Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, the body has almost no dissenting voices.
First, it was the expulsion of 4 opposition lawmakers accused of endangering national security. Then, in a dramatic shift, the entirety of Hong Kong's elected pro-democracy opposition announced its resignation on Wednesday in protest.
The decision made by the central government simply say that all the separation of power will be taken away and all the power will be centralized in the chief executive. Of course, chief executive is the puppet of the central government. So as a result, that is the basic argument why we say today is the end of the one country, two system.
The move comes after Beijing passed a resolution giving local authorities broad new powers to quash dissent. The resolution, passed by China's highest legislative body, allows Hong Kong's executive to expel elected lawmakers directly without having to go through the courts.
You have to note that this is not just a single event of unseating a certain number of legislators and then forcing the rest of us to quit. This is an actual act by Beijing to their thinking to sound the death knell of Hong Kong's democracy fight, because they would think that from now on, anyone they found to be politically incorrect or unpatriotic or simply not likable to look at, they could just oust you.
Under the new ruling, lawmakers deemed to be supporting Hong Kong independence, colluding with foreign forces or threatening national security will immediately lose their qualifications. Earlier, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, said the disqualifications were constitutional, legal, reasonable and necessary. The government's clampdown comes in response to months of pro-democracy protests, which at their height last summer attracted more than 1 million people and plunged the city into political crisis. Some Hong Kong activists, including former lawmakers and protest leaders, have sought political asylum in other countries, fearing for their safety. Critics now fear that with Beijing's ruling and the expulsion of democracy lawmakers, Hong Kong's parliament may just become a rubber-stamp body for pro-Beijing policies.
And to politics in the United States, President-elect Joe Biden says the President Donald Trump's refusal to concede victory in last week's White House election is an embarrassment. Mr. Biden also insists that nothing will stop the transfer of power, as he is already making contact with foreign leaders. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, tweeted that he would ultimately win the race, that all major TV networks have forecast that he lost.
While the UN calls for President-elect Joe Biden to usher in swift reforms to address police brutality and racism in the U.S., President-elect Joe Biden is still at a standstill as he has not been provided with the appropriate resources or access to create a smooth transition between the two administrations.
We are already beginning the transition. We're well underway. We're going to be moving along in a consistent manner, putting together our administration, the White House, and reviewing who we're going to pick for the cabinet positions. And nothing's going to stop that. I think the legal action is, you're seeing it play out, the actions he's taking. And so far, there is no evidence of any of the assertions made by the President or Secretary of State Pompeo. The whole Republican Party has been put in a position, with a few notable exceptions, of being mildly intimidated by the sitting president.
The Trump administration's belief that the president will have a second term, despite the election results projecting Joe Biden as the 46th president of the U.S., was reaffirmed by Secretary of State Pompeo.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Right? We're ready. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence that the transition necessary to make sure that the State Department is functional today, successful today, and successful with the president who's in office on January 20th, mid-afternoon, will also be successful. I'm getting calls from all across the world. These people are watching our election. They understand that we have a legal process. They understand that this takes time. Right? It took us 37 plus days in an election back in 2000. We conducted a successful transition then. I'm very confident that we will count, and we must count every legal vote. We must make sure that any vote that wasn't lawful ought not be counted. That dilutes your vote if it's done improperly.
This comes as no surprise to American voter Rondell Westcott.
And they just have not been in Donald Trump's favor. And while the attention is being diverted to counting or recounting of ballots, it's opening our country up to be vulnerable for safety and national security threats, because our attention is not being focused on our security and our safety, but yet it's being diverted to ballot counts. So we need to turn attention back to making sure this country is safe and sound for all American people.
The world watches as America's national security could be at stake if appropriate actions are not taken for a smooth transition of power. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
Well, Maria joins us now for more on this from Washington, D.C. Maria, thank you for joining us today on The World Today.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so despite projections that the next president is Joe Biden, we did hear Secretary of State Mike Pompeo say there would be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. However, there seems to be a lot of confidence about the irregularities from the Trump campaign. What smoking gun do they have? Is there something we aren't seeing?
You know, there's been nothing that has been revealed that is, as you said, something that we just haven't seen. I think at this time, this is really about a disbelief that President Trump could have lost the election, because based this a referendum on his first term, and it was basically the people speaking out that they were clearly unhappy with some things. And I think his administration is trying everything they can to keep him in office. You know, there's always concerns about what could happen once he leaves office. Will there be other legal litigations brought up against him once he leaves office? And so this is something that most people are, extremely surprised about. But at the same time, President Trump was very clear in believing that he was going to win the next election. So it's very hard for his team, his cabinet, to come to grips with what could be a reality come January the 20th.
So a politician in Texas says he will offer about $1 million to anyone who comes forward with information of voter fraud from any state in the U.S. if it leads to an arrest. What significance is this likely to have on Trump's legal challenge?
This will obviously, if someone has information, they come forth. I think that that is what the legal team is looking for right now. They're looking for information that could have, obviously, we know Nevada, there are many individuals that were on a list that said that they were, they voted illegally. But again, most of what has come out in that regard, the 3,000 names, is that those individuals were actually Nevada residents paying taxes to Nevada, and that they were just living, temporarily somewhere else. So that would not be considered illegal voting. So I think they're just looking to see if there's any real evidence that could help support their case.
And so how are these legal challenges likely to affect Joe Biden's transition to power before January 20th?
Well, the Biden campaign and the president-elect and all of those who are volunteering in his transitional committee are obviously, pushing forward, and they are following through with various initiatives, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's the Obamacare initiative, whether it's, a focus on police brutality, as we know the UN called for yesterday. So they are moving forward with building some sort of a transition. The challenge is there is a need to have cooperation from the current Trump administration, especially the GSA, which allows for spending of funds to be able to ensure that you're able to have those items in place come January 20th. And that is what's being held back at this time. And obviously also some confidential information that would need to be shared in meetings that would need to go between the two parties to ensure that the security of the U.S. is at the utmost importance and that transition happens smoothly.
Right. So, Maria, we do know that, the Trump administration is stalling, trying to slow Joe Biden down as regards to a smooth transition. But Mr. Biden is moving on. We know that he's already naming some people for his transition to power before January 20th. Any names that we know?
Well, there have been those typical names that we've heard. We've heard Elizabeth Warren, who we know was running for president. So that name is still there. We've heard potentially Eric Holder. We've heard Stacey Abrams. We've heard a list of individuals that obviously we've seen during the selection process. But I believe we should most likely see a short list coming out sometime this week.
And before I let you go, let's look at another aspect of this election, focus on the vice president-elect now. A lot of uncharted territories here when it comes to Kamala Harris. She's the first woman, first Asian and first black woman to become vice president. Earlier, her husband said that he will be quitting his law firm to focus on supporting his wife in her role at the White House. Tell us more about this.
Well, he took a leave of absence during the campaign from his role. And I think that he is looking to really take on being the first gentleman as the vice president's husband in this role. And he's taking it very seriously. He has a legal background. Obviously, the U.S. will need quite a bit of support, especially looking at the Department of Justice being built. He will probably have an initiative. We will see for the first time having a male-focused initiative. And so I think he's taking this extremely seriously. I mean, again, they're moving across the country, all the way to the East Coast. And so I think he wants to be with his wife and to be that support for her, because the country is definitely going to be doing things very differently than we've seen in the past 4 years.
Thank you so much for your time today, Maria Bird, our correspondent in Washington.
Thank you for having me.
Let's move on to other stories. Several people have been injured in a bomb attack at a Remembrance Day ceremony attended by former diplomats in the Saudi city of Jeddah. A French Foreign Ministry statement says an improvised explosive device blew up at a cemetery for non-Muslims as officials from several consulates remember the end of World War I. It strongly condemns what it calls the cowardly, unjustifiable attack. The French consulate in Jeddah also urges French nationals in Saudi Arabia to exercise maximum vigilance following the attack. On October 29th, a guard at the French consulate in Jeddah was stabbed and injured by a Saudi man on the same day that 3 people were killed in a knife attack in the French city of Nice that was blamed on Islamist terrorists.
ملابسات على دواعي ودوافع هذه الحادثة ولكن بالتأكيد حسن سنكون في تغطية مستمرة.
And still to come on the program. Palestinian baker keeps lion cubs as pets on Gaza rooftop with many residents unfazed. Details in a moment. Welcome back to the program. French President Emmanuel Macron has led France's traditional Armistice Day ceremony at Arc de Triomphe, Paris, honoring soldiers who fought and perished during the two world wars. The French president laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier to mark the armistice that ended the Great War on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. He then rekindled the flame at the foot of the tomb during a solemn ceremony that was scaled back due to the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown measures. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande, as well as Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, also attended the ceremony. Over in Britain, the country fell silent to mark Armistice Day and commemorate the country's war dead. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, opposition leader Keir Starmer, and Prince Charles and his wife Camilla attended a service at Westminster Abbey to mark the centenary of the burial of the unknown warrior whose grave represents those who died during the war without being identified. A 2-minute silence was observed at London's Cenotaph, as well as at ceremonies in Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast. Prince Edward and his wife Sophie attended another service at the National Arboretum in Staffordshire. Armistice Day marks the end of World War I on November 11th, 1918. Elsewhere now, thousands of people have joined a rally in the center of Armenia's capital, Yerevan, after the Prime Minister agreed a peace deal to end 6 weeks of fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh. 17 opposition parties took part in the protests and dozens of people were arrested amid demands for the Armenian leader to resign. Under the Russian brokered deal, Azerbaijan keeps areas it has captured. Hundreds of Russian peacekeepers have already been deployed there. Nagorno-Karabakh is an enclave internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, but it has been controlled by ethnic Armenians since a 1994 truce. Azerbaijan has not only recaptured areas around the enclave, but it has taken the key town of Shusha inside it too. In the Philippines, authorities have ordered thousands of residents in eastern coastal communities to evacuate ahead of the landfall of Typhoon Vamco, only weeks after the country was battered by the strongest cyclone so far this year. Vamco, which carries sustained winds of 125 kilometers per hour and gusts of up to 155 kilometers per hour, is the 21st tropical storm to hit the Philippines this year. The island province of Catanduan and nearby Albay, both southeast of the capital Manila, bore the brunt of Typhoon Goni in late October, a Category 5 typhoon that killed 25 people and left 6 still missing. Vamco is due to make landfall in Polillo Island this evening and hit rice-producing provinces north of the capital before exiting the Philippines' main island of Luzon on Thursday. In other news, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, has rejected a request for peace talks as the conflict in Tigray deepens. Tigray's leader, Debretsion Gebre-Michael, wrote to the African Union last week to request talks, but Prime Minister Ahmed Said said in a tweet that there would be no dialogue until our efforts to ascertain the rule of law are achieved. Hundreds have died since the conflict in Ethiopia's northern region erupted. Last Wednesday, Mr. Abiy ordered a military offensive after an army base in the Tigrayan capital, Mekelle, was taken over by forces loyal to the regional government of Tigray, following months of worsening tension between Tigrayan leaders and the federal government. And the world's longest-serving Prime Minister, Prince Khalifa bin Salman Al Khalifa of Bahrain, has died at the age of 84. Prince Khalifa, who took office after Bahrain gained independence in 1971, had been receiving treatment at a hospital in the United States. He was an uncle to King Hamad and had a powerful role within the royal family. The prince was regarded by some as a hardliner, and his removal was demanded by pro-democracy protesters during a failed Arab Spring uprising in 2011. He said the Arab Spring had brought only death, chaos, and destruction, and denied claims that he had blocked political reform efforts in Bahrain. The European Union has agreed to buy up to 300 million doses of the BioNTech Pfizer coronavirus vaccine after it showed strong results in trials. Deliveries are expected to start by the end of this year, but the EU refused to provide details on how the vaccine would be rolled out, insisting that a number of steps needed to be followed beforehand. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update.
The European Commission has sealed a deal with Pfizer and BioNTech for the supply of up to 300 million doses of their COVID-19 vaccine candidates. But the EU warns that availability of an effective vaccine would not mean all restrictions and safety measures would be suspended right away. The move follows Pfizer's announcement on Monday that its experimental vaccine developed with BioNTech was more than 90% effective, making them the first drug makers to show successful interim data from a large-scale clinical trial of a coronavirus vaccine. Hot on the heels of an announcement by US and German rivals, Russia has announced that its Sputnik V vaccine has shown to be 92% effective against COVID-19. The Russia teams say their own interim results, which hadn't been expected so soon, come from their own analysis of data from 16,000 volunteers, those who have so far received 2 injections with Sputnik V 21 days apart. Russia was widely criticized for its triumphalism back in August when it declared Sputnik V the world's first to be registered. At that point, phase 3 trials had not even begun. Over in Germany, doctors say the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine offers hope, but fear of a collapse of intensive care system. This comes as German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the coronavirus crisis remains severe and that the government would have to deal with the pandemic throughout the winter. And finally, Italy has ramped up coronavirus restrictions in Tuscany and 4 other regions to rein in the second wave of the pandemic. Last week, the government imposed nationwide curbs, including a nightly curfew, and divided the country into 3 zones based on the intensity of their COVID-19 outbreaks, calibrating additional limitations accordingly.
Finally, how would you like to have a lion as a pet? I'll wait for that answer soon. Well, in Khan Yunis, on the roof of an apartment block in one of Gaza's most crowded cities, 2 lion cubs prowl among the water tanks and dine on slaughtered chickens, and as children take selfies with them. It's a bizarre sight, even in a war-scarred Gaza Strip that has become accustomed to the unaccustomed. The 75-day-old male and female cubs have become playthings for bored neighbors of their owner, bakery owner Nassim Abu Jamia. As his nephews, brothers and neighbors' children play with the animals, he dismisses the risks. He says when you raise them as babies, a harmony will grow between both of you and they will not hurt you. Abu Jamia said he got the cubs from a local zoo but declined to give further details. Well, how about that for cat lovers? Well, that's it on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.